Throughout history, punishment was never just about justice. It was about fear, about control, about making one person suffer so 1,000 others would obey. Today, we're ranking 15 of the worst punishments in human history, from the least painful to the most painful. Let's begin. Yubitsume. Yubitsume was a ritual punishment practiced within Japanese yakuza groups. Instead of execution, the offender was forced to punish themselves. They would kneel, place their left little finger on a cloth or wooden board, and use a sharp knife to cut off a portion of the finger, usually at the first joint. The severed piece was carefully racked and presented to their boss as proof of remorse. The pain was sharp, sudden, and intense, but it didn't last long. The pain level of this punishment is relatively low, around 3 out of 10. Bastinado, foot whipping. At first it sounds simple, beating the feet, but the soles of the feet are packed with nerve endings. Bastinado was used across the Ottoman Empire, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. The victim was restrained on the ground or on a bench, with their feet raised and tied in place. An executioner then struck the bare soles with rods, canes, or whips. Again and again. The beating often paused just long enough for swelling to set in, making every next strike even worse. The pain didn't stop when the punishment ended. It would last for days, sometimes weeks, and walking became torture. Survivable but impossible to forget. On a scale of pain, this punishment is considered a 4 out of 10. Tarring and feathering. This punishment wasn't just about pain, it was about public humiliation. Tarring and feathering was used in medieval Europe and later in colonial America, especially during periods of political unrest. The victim was stripped to expose their skin. Hot pine tar was then poured or brushed directly onto the body. As the tar burned and blistered the skin, feathers were pressed into it, sticking instantly as the tar hardened. The victim was then paraded through town, surrounded by laughing, shouting crowds. The pain was very real. Burns, blisters, and infections were common. The pain level of this punishment is moderate, rated at 5 out of 10. Itch capping. This punishment was used during the Irish Rebellion of 1798 by British forces against suspected rebels. The victim's head was completely shaved, leaving the scalp fully exposed. A paper or cloth cap was then filled with boiling pitch and forced down onto the scalp. The pitch cooled and hardened within minutes, bonding tightly to skin and hair follicles. Then came the final step. The cap was ripped off violently. Skin, hair, sometimes flesh, all torn away in one motion. Severe bleeding was common, and infection often finished what the pitch had started. The pain level of this punishment was severe, around 6 out of 10. The rack. This punishment wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to break you. The victim was strapped to a long wooden frame with their wrists and ankles bound to rollers at opposite ends. Slowly, the executioner turned the mechanism. The body stretched inch by inch. Shoulders and hips popped out of their sockets. Muscles tore. Ligaments snapped. When the victim screamed for mercy, the executioners would stop, not out of compassion, but to demand confessions. Then, without warning, they will turn the wheel again. Many survived, but very few ever walked normally again. The pain inflicted by this punishment was intense, rated at 7 out of 10. Keelhauling. This punishment was reserved for sailors. The victim was tightly bound to a rope, then thrown overboard from one side of the ship. Sharp barnacles ripped into exposed flesh. Salt water flooded the lungs, triggering drowning panic. The body slammed repeatedly against wood and iron supports beneath the ship, often breaking bones. If the victim survived the first pass, they were dragged back again. Many didn't survive even once. The pain caused by this punishment was extreme, around 8 out of 10. Blinding. This punishment spared life, but it destroyed sight. Blinding was used in the ancient Persia and parts of medieval Europe, often as punishment for rivals, prisoners, or traitors. The victim was restrained, unable to move. Executioners then burned the eyes with hot irons, or gouged them out using sharp tools. In some cases, acidic substances were poured in to ensure permanent damage. The victim survived, but from that moment on, they lived in total darkness. No execution, no mercy, just a lifetime sentence without sight. The pain inflicted by this punishment was severe. reaching 8 out of 10. Elephant crushing. In parts of South and Southeast Asia, justice came on 4 massive legs. Elephant crushing was used in regions like India, Sri Lanka, and parts of Southeast Asia from ancient times through the 19th century. The elephants were specially trained to follow precise commands from their handlers. Sometimes, the execution was swift, a single step to the head, the skull crushed instantly, but other times death was made slow. The elephant would break the victim's arms and legs first, one by one. Only after prolonged suffering the handler signaled the final command. One last step, one final crush. On a scale of 1 to 10, this punishment's pain reached a harrowing 9 out of 10. Immurement, walled alive. Imagine standing inside a small stone chamber and watching bricks slowly close the opening. Immurement was used as punishment for treason, heresy, or betrayal. The victim was placed inside a narrow cell or wall cavity. Brick by brick, the entrance was sealed. No light, no sound, no escape. In some cases, a small opening was left, allowing tiny amounts of food or water to prolong suffering. In others, nothing was given. Death came slowly from thirst, starvation, or the slow collapse of the mind in total darkness. This punishment caused almost unbearable suffering, with a pain level of 9 out of 10. Rat torture. This punishment weaponized fear itself. Rat torture was used during the 16th century Dutch revolt as a method of interrogation. The victim was restrained, unable to move. A cage or container filled with starving rats was placed against the body. Heat was then applied to the cage. As the metal grew hot, the rats panicked. Trapped and desperate, they searched for escape. There was only one way out, through flesh. The pain was unbearable, gnawing, tearing, and deep inside the body. The pain inflicted by this punishment was nearly unimaginable, rated at 9.2 out of 10. Breaking on the wheel. This punishment was a public event. Breaking on the wheel was used for crimes like murder and highway robbery. The victim was tied down, often stretched across a wooden frame or wheel. An executioner then used a heavy iron bar or hammer to shatter the limbs. The blows were delivered carefully, not to kill, but to keep the victim alive as long as possible. Once broken, the mangled body was woven into the spokes of the wheel and raised high on a pole for everyone to see. Death could take hours, sometimes days, from blood loss, shock, or slow organ failure. The agony of this punishment was almost unbearable, reaching 9.5 out of 10. Boiling alive. This punishment allowed no mercy. The victim was tied to a frame and lowered into a cauldron of boiling water, oil, or tar. Sometimes feet first to make the suffering last longer. The heat destroyed the body layer by layer. Skin blistered instantly, nerves burned away, muscles collapsed, organs failed one after another. Screams faded as shock took over. There was no survival, only prolonged agony followed by death. The pain of this punishment was absolute and unrelenting, a full 10 out of 10. Impalement. This punishment was designed to keep the victim alive. Impalement was used in Eastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and parts of Asia, most infamously under Vlad the Impaler in the 15th century. A sharpened wooden or metal stake was forced into the body, usually through the lower abdomen. Executioners positioned it carefully, avoiding the heart and lungs. The stake was then planted upright, and gravity did the rest. The body slowly slid downward over hours or days. Organs were displaced. Internal bleeding continued. Every breath brought pain. Many victims unable to move, unable to escape, until shock, infection, and exhaustion finally ended them. This punishment inflicted the ultimate agony, rated a full 10 out of 10. Lingchi. Death by 1,000 cuts. This punishment was reserved for the worst crimes imaginable. Lingchi was used in imperial China for centuries, often for treason, patricide, or crimes against the state. The victim was restrained and kept alive. An executioner then removed small pieces of flesh slowly, one cut at a time, not to kill, but to delay death. Crowds watched as the body weakened, piece by piece. Only at the very end was death finally delivered. Lingchi was abolished in 1905. The suffering caused by this punishment was total and unimaginable. A perfect 10 out of 10. Scaphism. The boats. This is considered the most prolonged execution in recorded history. Scaphism was used in ancient Persia, described by Greek historians as punishment for extreme crimes. The victim was trapped between two hollowed wooden boats, with only the head, hands, and feet exposed. They were force-fed milk and honey. The same mixture was poured over their skin. Then the boats were left floating in swamps or stagnant water. Insects came. They fed. They laid eggs. They burrowed into flesh. The diet caused severe diarrhea, trapping waste inside the boats, accelerating infection and decay. The body slowly rotted from the outside and inside while the person remained alive. The pain of this punishment was absolute, a full 10 out of 10. These punishments show us something uncomfortable. Not just how cruel the past was, but how power, fear, and justice once blurred into something monstrous. If you made it to the end, comment which punishment shocked you the most, and subscribe for more dark history.